We've been able to mobilize the international community to not only put diplomatic pressure on Russia, but also we've been able to organize European countries, who many were skeptical would do anything, to work with us in applying sanctions to Russia. Well, what else should we be doing? Well, we shouldn't be putting troops in, the critics will say. That's not what we mean. Well, okay, what are you saying? Well, we should be arming Ukrainians more. Do people actually think that that somehow us sending some additional arms into Ukraine could potentially deter the Russian army? Or are we more likely to deter them by applying the sort of international pressure, diplomatic pressure, and economic pressure that we're applying?
It is not always the first thing that comes to mind when voters are deciding who will be their national leader for the next 4 years. Often it is about the economy, jobs, the things that impact the individual. But foreign policy is what makes the country what it is in many aspects. And all too often it seems our leaders fail to learn what has come before and how it will affect the now and the future. Let's welcome into MidPoint the former Undersecretary of Defense under Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, also a former naval officer who understands the mindset of those we deal with every day around the world. Seth Cropsey joins us. Seth, thanks so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
Seth, let's get to it first of all, right from the president's words. He says, what else should we be doing? Isn't it a little disingenuous for any president to say that, because they're always focusing on what is happening right now, when in essence, you do have to look back over what you did last month, last year, and what someone else did perhaps 10 years before you to decide exactly what needs to be done?
Right, so the question is, what else should the president be doing, right?
There you go.
I think the first thing is the president should be explaining to the American people what is at stake. Why is it important that Russia, what does it mean for Russia to be on the move, taking over other people's countries by force and threatening to take larger pieces of them? What difference does that mean for the United States? That's part of what a leader does in order to explain to people what the stakes are. And then the answer about that the president gave about supplying military equipment to the Ukrainians, that's absolutely what we should be doing. Have sanctions worked? Well, judge for yourself. Malaysian plane falls out of the sky. Russian troops massing on the border. The sanctions may have done something or other, but they haven't stopped the Russians from their military ambitions in Ukraine.
Seth, when you look at foreign policy from presidents and your experience, what is the first thing snaps right to mind to you that presidents almost always seem to get wrong? And I think that might be the president calling right now, as a matter of fact, just to see if he can shut us down. You never know. It's in this world, the way spies are running around these days, Seth, you got to be careful. But what is that one thing that, in your experience, they always get wrong, no matter who it is?
Well, it differs from one president to the next. Some presidents, for example, Lyndon Johnson, were anguished by the domestic upheaval over the war in Vietnam. I'm sorry about the telephone ringing there.
No, that's quite all right.
And responded accordingly. That's understandable. One of the other things that President Johnson did was, and going back in history here, was he had a very heavy hand on which targets were going to be bombed in North Vietnam. One can understand that, but those decisions are usually best left to the military. So really, it depends on the person, on the person's advisors, and it's simply impossible to say that there is one thing or one category in which presidents make failures in foreign policy. I think what is important here and unique about this president is that he holds a view of America's role in the world that is different from all of his predecessors.
You just hit on something here when I asked about the one thing. You used the word advisors. And many people that I've spoken to over the years, political savants, people who know it inside and out, a lot of them always tell me the same thing. They say one of the biggest things that presidents do is they pick lousy advisors. They pick sycophants. They're not always necessarily picking the people who actually know what they're doing. And when they do get those people, they don't listen to them because the other ones over here are the ones basically who have their ears saying and whispering in it saying, no, you don't have to do that. Isn't it fair to say that advisors themselves play a huge role here?
Advisors play a large role, but it's the president's choice of advisors. When President Obama came into office, he had Secretary Gates as the Secretary of Defense, who had served under the Bush administration and had a long and distinguished record during the Cold War. Both he and his successor, Leon Panetta, advised the president, both privately and publicly, that the massive kinds of defense budget cuts that Obama was thinking about would leave the military force hollow. And so when Panetta left, the president found a senator who was not going to make that advice, offer that kind of advice, Chuck Hagel, and has not offered that kind of advice, although he has made the point that there is a cost for these defense budget cuts. So in that sense, the president's getting exactly what he wants, and it's the same thing with the Secretary of State. They were appointed because their views are close to the president's.
If we look back over recent history then, in light of looking at all the different things that Barack Obama has done as president, is it fair to say that his decision not to stay in Iraq, not to stay some kind of course, but to make the right decisions there, not learn from history, will basically stick with him and will be the single greatest disaster that he's had foreign policy-wise in his administration?
Will Iraq be the single greatest disaster?
Not staying there, deciding basically to pull out, to get out of Iraq, but not staying there and staying the course.
Yeah, I understand the question. It's very hard to tell right now. There are so many regional conflicts that are ignited or in the process of flaring up around the world. If some of these start to connect, you have what turns into different fires becomes one big one, and that would be a disaster of much greater magnitude than what's happened to Iraq. So I think with 2 years and 5 months left in the administration, it's simply too early to tell.
A couple of minutes we have left. I wanted to get your opinion on this. The Obama administration program that secretly sent young Latin Americans to Cuba under cover of health and civic programs looking to provoke political change there, beginning as early as October 2009. Was this a good idea? Is this something that you think should have been considered?
Well, I'm not familiar with the program. I think that Cuba is not the country that it was during the Cold War. And yes, we're looking at the prospect of, if not a renewed Cold War, certainly much worsened relations between Russia and the United States. And so the possibility that Cuba will again become an outpost of Russia rather than the Soviet Union is a real one. And I think that relations with Cuba should be looked at in those terms, which is to say, since the end of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, it's been relatively harmless. But Cuba and Cuban leadership has economic problems, and Russia has the means to help them with that. And as you know, they're 90 miles from Florida, and so we should be very careful about what we're doing with Cubans.
We should indeed. Seth Cropsey, thanks so much for joining us. I'm sorry that we probably got the CIA or somebody on the telephone there while we were talking about this. We have to always be careful of those things.
Yeah, probably the pizza guy.
Pepperoni and sausage or something else? I mean, I just need to. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that we're still looking at the All-American pizza here, no matter how we go into that. Seth, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, take care. By the way, world trouble spots, 42% of the people asked say the conflict between Israel and Hamas is very or extremely important to them, and 60% disapprove of the way that President Obama has handled it. That is foreign policy right there. Later on this hour, Ebola's here in America. America's concerned, rightfully so. And up next, our elected officials make the rounds of the Sunday shows, where anything usually goes, and somebody always says something they might regret. It's coming up next right here on MidPoint.